Well, here we go again. Dealing with the dangers and the destructiveness of living with our us versus them mentalities. This time, the destructiveness is showing itself in the U.S. with yet another mass shooting that took place this past Wednesday in the upper regions of the U.S. in Maine. And certainly, my thoughts and my prayers are with the people and the families that have been impacted by this horrific, senseless event. Whether you had a loved one that was murdered or injured, or whether you're in the area and you was just traumatized by yet another senseless mass shooting. My thoughts and my prayers are with you, but I must say that I'm disturbed. I'm troubled because this is not the only situation that we're dealing with on a large scale as a result of living with this us versus them mentality. When we look at Israel, the same destructiveness is playing itself out there with the war between Israel and Hamas or the Palestinian people. When we look at Ukraine, the same destructiveness is playing itself out there with the war between Ukraine and Russia. It's senseless, and there's a better way of living. And those are just the larger global events that we know about that's creating calamity and destruction in the earth. They don't even begin to account for all the wars that are being fought in our neighborhoods, our cities, our states, between people that are at war with one another because we've allowed our human labels. We've allowed ourselves to be indoctrinated in such a way that makes us live life from the perspective of us versus them. And so for a moment, I want to talk about the dangers and the destructiveness of living with these us versus them mentalities. I want to look at what causes us to live like this. Also looking at the byproducts of us living like this. And then before we get out of here, I want to switch gears or pivot so that we begin to look at how we move in a different, more healthier, constructive way of living in a diverse world among people of diversity. That we might learn to live together with each other in peace as siblings of the human family. Is that okay? Well, let's talk about what this us versus them mentality really is, that we better understand it so that we better see and examine our own selves and begin to call it out when we see it in ourselves, when we see it and hear it in others. Is that okay? And basically what this us versus them mentality really consists of is allowing ourselves to be divided, usually for the purpose of conflict, competition, war, and discrimination based upon our differences. And religion is what causes Christians to see themselves as different from Muslims. That causes Christians to think that other Christians are like us, that they're part of our group, versus Muslims who are inherently different. It's what causes Christians to think of God or the God of Christianity as being different from the God of Islam. Think about it. I'm not just making this up, but it's not just present in the Christian faith. No, it's the same thing, the same us versus them mentality that causes Muslims to think of Jews and Christians as infidels, as people that deserve to be destroyed, people that deserve to be slaughtered, people that deserve to be killed. But it's not just with Muslims and Christians, it's the same thing that causes Jews to think of Palestinians as them or those people that are not like us. And what we know is that it's much easier to mistreat, kill, and discriminate against people that we think, that we consider to not be like us, people we consider to be inferior to us, people that we consider to really not even be human at all, or part human. It's basically allowing ourselves to be divided for the purpose of conflict, war, and discrimination based upon our differences. Again, whether they be differences in our religions or our ethnicities. It's why you can have one race of people believing that they're superior to other races, that work to oppress and categorize people that are not like them as subhumans or as animals. But it's not just present in our religions or our ethnicities. No. When we look at our politics, we approach it from the perspective of us versus them. Dems versus conservatives, or Dem versus Republicans, conservative versus liberals. And in addition to this, we've got an obsession with dividing ourselves based upon our nationalities, which is why so many Americans, so many Jews think that we're superior to people of other nations, that the US and Israel are inherently superior nations to other nations. And the problem isn't with our diversity, because God created diversity just like He created it in the rainbow. It's that we don't approach our diversity from a perspective of curiosity. We don't approach it wanting to grow into better people as a result of venturing outside or beyond the familiarity of our own tribes. See, we usually see our differences and our diversity from a place that leads us to destruction, discrimination, violence, and war. I mean, just look around and observe what we're living, how we're living. And it's this us versus them mentality that's creating it, because it makes it easy to mistreat and murder those that we consider to not be like us. Think about it. Isn't it easier when you think that they're really not like you to do harm to them? Which is why we don't just shoot up our homes. We don't just shoot up our loved ones. It's because we think of them as being a part of us, which causes us to seek out and to notice commonalities instead of focusing and highlighting all of our differences. Think about terrorism and terrorists. Most time, it's simply the result of one people thinking that they're not like another people. One group feeling marginalized, one group feeling discriminated against, and even abused, who think that murder is the only solution to being seen, to being treated like human beings, being treated like others will want to be treated themselves. And sometimes, unfortunately, they think that killing and murdering the innocents needs to be done because the innocents aren't calling out the oppressors that's creating the calamity for them. But ultimately, it's the result of us living from these us versus them mentalities. And so you have terrorists that will conclude that the entire group deserves to suffer because there are members that are a part of the group that's inflicting oppression upon them. Just look at the devastation and the destruction that's going on around the world. Ancient places of worship being destroyed. Historical monuments being destroyed. People's homes, people's cities being completely obliterated. Our humanity and our goodwill, one person to another, is being destroyed. And the lion's share of the problem can be traced back to the mindset and the ideology of us versus them. See, typically when I have these discussions, I often ask people, who wins in the war of humanity versus itself? And if there is a winner, what's the prize? What are we getting other than more chaos, more destruction, more violence, and more war? And if those are the prizes, count me out. I don't want them because I know how destructive they've been to us as a human race of people. But my question then becomes, how long do we continue to walk in darkness, being tricked by the enemy and those that unnaturally divide us against ourselves, whether they use race, religion, God, our nationality, or our politics? And they're only using it to maintain power, dominance, greed, money, and influence. How long do we allow ourselves to be pawns that are used in our own self-destruction, our own self-annihilation? And I ask this because we can't keep finding every reason under the sun to be divided and then think that we're going to establish God's kingdom in the earth and save humanity. And if things weren't so bad, I wouldn't continue. I wouldn't go on and on about this. But we need to diagnose and address the cancer that's within us, that's destroying us as a people. Because if not, We'll keep putting bandages on the symptoms when there's a mass catastrophe like, the bombing in Israel, instead of rooting out the disease that's causing the symptoms and the problems altogether. We'll keep justifying and excusing the behavior of more aggressive nations against smaller, weaker nations. And we'll make countries like Russia, countries like Israel, feel emboldened by attacking smaller countries or like Ukraine and people like the Palestinians. We'll keep whitewashing, dismissing, and excusing the atrocities of Israel that are committed against the Palestinian people, while at the same time we'll continue condemning the reactions and the responses of Hamas. And let me say that they should be condemned because murder, terrorism is unaccepted, whether it's done by Hamas or whether it's done by Israel. But we can't just condemn the response of the terrorists without condemning the colonizers that oppress, discriminate, and marginalize people that they consider to not be like them. Kind of look at it from both perspectives. Think about slavery. Because at its origins is the belief that they were not like us. Whether they were Indians, whether it was black or brown people like myself, well, we just weren't like white people. And they considered that reasons to discriminate and to enslave us. Or even beyond slavery, when you look at Jim Crow laws, you look at institutional and systematic racism. It too stemmed from the ideology of us versus them. They're not like us. That black and brown people are not like us. And in fact, they're not even fully humans. When I look at them and I look at their behavior, I think of them as animals who needs to be dealt with harshly, whether through slavery, discrimination, imprisonment, or death. And we've got to begin to call this out. And so let's for a moment look at what causes some of us to live life from these us versus them mentalities, that we might recognize it again and root it out from among us, or at least begin defeating it individually and collectively. And one of the reasons that we live with this warped ideology is because we've got a distorted and a warped understanding of God. We think of God as being our God or the God of some and not the God of all. Think about it. If you're Christian, then God is your God and not the God of Muslims. If you're Muslim, then Allah is your God and not the God of Jews or Indians. Two, we have a distorted and a warped understanding of who we are as humans. We think that we're no more than our labels. Think about it. How do we self-identify? Not as humans, but as black, white, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Palestinian, but not as humans. We think that black makes us different from white, that Democrat makes us different from Republican, that Christian makes us different from Muslim. And it's destroying us. That American makes us different from Russia. We even think that heterosexual makes us different from homosexual. But the same Creator creates us all, and He created us all humans. And so for a moment, let me just say that highlighting our diversity is okay, so long as it's not to paint with broad brushes that makes an entire group of people have to fit into one box of them in this game of us versus them. Because what really makes us different is our fingerprints. Yet we very rarely, if ever, ask people to see their fingerprints so that we can use their fingerprints or the differences in their fingerprints to justify a mindset of us versus them that then makes us attack them, makes us mistreat them, makes us abuse them. And part of the problem that we face is that we're constantly being told that we're different. Our media is constantly telling us that we're different. Our politicians are telling us that we're different. Our religious leaders are telling us that we're different. Our teachers, advertisers are telling us that we're different based upon race, religion, our nationalities, our choices. And we can't continually be told that we're different and then act as if we're one people that's united. No, we've been and we're continuing to be indoctrinated for our destruction, to keep the powerful in power, and to keep the commoners living in chaos, fighting and killing ourselves. But the truth is that we're one people underneath our human labels. We're all created by the same one God that creates us humans, regardless of what we call him or how we self-identify, what we call ourselves. And this is the truth that the powerful don't want us to know. Because as long as they can keep us divided, we can continue to be controlled. They can continue to conquer us. As long as we're divided, we'll keep fighting each other instead of fighting those that conspire to destroy us just to maintain power. Look around. And what I say to you is that the great Roman Empire is falling. And that it's going to be up to us, it's going to be our responsibility to rebuild the world back with truth and the reality of one, the philosophy of one. The reality that one God, by whatever name you call him, created us all, created all things. That we're all one people underneath our human labels. That God's human expectations for us are the same, from the first humans to the last humans. And that they are to love God for who he is and for what he does for us, to love universal good, to love ourselves, and to love others as ourselves. And this is beyond our human labels. This is human to human. And one of the definitions of love is to give of oneself for the benefit of another. Not to give of ourselves for our own destruction or the destruction of another. No, we have to know and we have to accept that God's call back to all of us is the same. And his call is for us to be in bondage to him through his religion of good, because it's the only religion that's been available for all humans since the beginning of time. That he isn't a respecter of persons, and that he judges us all the same, judging our thoughts, our words, our attitudes, and our actions. And that he uses the measures of good and evil, universal and timeless good and evil, to judge us. We've got to get back to this place of one, knowing that the only battle that God sent us here to fight is the battle between good and evil within our own heart, and then defeating it collectively in the world. And so the question that we must ask ourselves is, what are we going to do? Will we keep allowing ourselves to be deceived, or will we wake up, learn the truth, live the truth, and save humanity? The choice is ours. And as Joshua said a long time ago, we must choose ye this day whom we will serve. Will we keep serving the ruler of destruction, or will we begin to serve the giver of life? And for those of you that chooses to serve the giver of life, that chooses to serve the God of universal and timeless good, that want to know the truth, well, the truth begins with knowing the truth about God beyond names and religion. And I created a course that God gave me called The Real Truth About God Beyond Names and Beyond Religion, that highlights the 6 universal truths about God that makes him not the God of some people, that makes him not just a religious God or an ethnic God or a cultural God or even a national God, but makes him the God who created all of us, who's the creator and the father of all humans. And so to learn more about the course, or just to enroll in the course, visit my website at carloshead.com. And when you get there, click on the tab, Carlos Head University. And when you get to Carlos Head University, there you will find all the details about the course. I also ask you to follow me on social media, on all the social media platforms, at either Carlos Head 07 or Carlos Head at 07. And lastly, I asked that you would like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more thought-provoking conversations and videos like this. I love you, and I truly want us to become the best versions of who God created us to be. But I know that that begins with knowing who God is beyond names and religion, knowing who we are underneath our human label so that we stop living our lives from this perspective of us versus them.